Okay, good afternoon, and welcome to the fourth session of the Sunoikisis Digital Classics Spring 2018 semester. This session is on text annotation, and in a slight change to the advertised program, this will be a discussion between myself, Gabriel Bodard from the Institute of Classical Studies, and Monica Berti in Leipzig, and also Simona Stoyanova and Valeria Vitale, and I hope joining us later, Lucia Venini, all also from the Institute of Classical Studies, on the general subject of text annotation. So I wanted to start, let me quickly share some slides. If I can find them. You can all see the slides now? Yep. So yes, we're talking about text annotation. I'm going to talk sort of briefly for the beginning of this session about a few topics, generally about annotation as a whole, what we mean by named entities, and then look in more detail at the open annotation format, which is the web standard for annotations. Talk very briefly about two tools for annotation, one which I suspect everybody watching this has already heard of and used, which is Recogito, and another which is Hypothesis. And then from there, we want to talk a little bit more about various people's experiences with using annotation, and we will at some point also show the use of Hypothesis in a little bit more detail as a practical exercise that you can go away and try out yourselves and see how annotation works, and use it as a tool for thinking with as for what sorts of things you want to annotate in a particular text that you have. And by no means should you be restrained to the kinds of things I've used in the example when I show what I've annotated in the text. So in terms of types of annotation, in addition to sort of web annotation, which is the kind of thing we'll be talking about more towards the end, effectively almost any kind of adding information to a text, whether it's your own text or someone else's text, is a form of annotation. Okay, so we've talked about annotation in pretty much every session this semester, and we will do for the rest of the semester as well. In particular, when we talked about translation alignment, we're annotating two texts to show relationships between them. When we've talked about image alignment, when we talk about markup, as we talked about last week, all of the various kinds of things that Monica told us about that people have historically marked up and that do in the digital age markup are all forms of annotation on a text, external or otherwise. And towards the end of the semester, we'll talk about linguistic annotation, morphosyntactic annotation, tree banking, and so forth. And these are all related to aspects of annotation. So this is sort of midway through the semester. It's sort of a crux in the discussion. It's everything links into this topic really. So when we talk about semantic markup, as we'll talk about in a bit more detail next week, you're annotating a text by adding XML tags or other kinds of tags to that text to create that annotation. When a commentator or editor of a text, whether this is an ancient commentator on a text or whether it's a 19th century author of a scholarly commentary, or whether it's a 21st century digital commentary that's created collaboratively by a large group of people, the individual comments that you make on passages of the text, whether they're on individual words, they may be linguistic comments on individual words, whether they're discussions, grammatical or historical discussions of lines and longer passages, references to individual people, connections to historical events, things that we learn about history from the texts, things that we extrapolate about the text based on history. All of those are comments tied to specific points in the text, which is really the canonical definition of the annotation, right? So all the types of annotation we'll be looking at this in this session are where you have a text. It could also be an image, it could be an object, or some other kind of digital object. And you attach either to the whole object or to a particular part of the object, a passage of the text. You attach a comment externally or internally to that, giving more information or giving more opinion on that passage or on that subset of the object. So you know, commentary of the kind that we're used to is precisely what we're talking about when we talk about annotation. I just wanted to say just a couple of words quickly about the difference between inline annotation and standoff annotation. And this is, we talked about this a little bit, I think, when we talked about markup last week. And the two link together. It's the same concept. So the kinds of examples we showed when we were marking up text last week is inline annotation, right, where you have a piece of text and you insert into the text a tag around a word to say that this word is a place name. Right, that's inline annotation. Standoff annotation is where you have a text and you want to say that on line 7 of that text, the third word on line 7, you know, in section 17 of book 4, whatever, that word is a place name. So you create an external pointer, possibly in RDF or in some other format, saying that in book 4, section 17, line 6, word 3, that word is a place name. And the external pointer, usually in some, you know, not in plain text like that, but in some technical pointer language, attaches your comment to that that passage of text. And the main difference between the two, well, the most obvious difference between the two is that for the inline commentary, it's much easier to use at that point. If I have a piece of text with an inline annotation in it, it's much easier for me to use that annotation if I have access to that text, because the markup is right there inside it. However, if I don't have control over that text, if I don't own that text, if I want to annotate text which is in the Perseids Digital Library, so not only do I not have that control over that text, but I shouldn't have control over that text, because a lot of the things that I want to say about that text are not the things that the readers of the Perseids Digital Library ever want to see inserted into that text. My creating the markup in a standoff format somewhere, in an open standard, ideally, that people can, other people will understand and can access, enables me to have essentially all the functionality I would get from putting the annotation in line, but without interfering with the text. So people can use it if they want, but the vast majority of people who use the text I'm annotating will ignore my annotation. So that's essentially the difference between inline and standoff markup, and we'll see examples of both as we go forward. So the most obvious and, if you like, easiest type of annotation that we often attach to texts, in addition to commentary which is the example I just talked about, but the most common kind of annotation is the annotation of named entities. So where a name appears in a text and we want to perhaps disambiguate that. So if a text includes the name Socrates, we might want to say which Socrates in history or potentially contemporary people, which of those is meant by Socrates in that particular passage. And these might be, these sort of entities can be people, can be places, events, dates and times, works. You can have, you know, bibliographic named entities, and citations, you know, cross-references to passages. So the text might not contain a reference to an external work, but it might contain a citation of another work. And you want to disambiguate by saying, you know, when he says in this passage in the beginning with the word, he's citing this particular text that says that, right? And that can be not unambiguous sometimes, because there might be several texts that use exactly the same wording, and you're citing one of them in particular. Right, you're citing, you know, a particular 19th century poem rather than the New Testament, for example, as a reference. And so you know, the disambiguation of that named entity can be a useful thing to do. And so this is the you know, the basic form of annotation. This is what we'll see in some of our examples as we go forward, where we annotate a text to say these are named entities, and these are what these named entities mean in there. And we'll start with the most common and easiest ones to demonstrate are things like people and places. But just to sort of put a flag that all these other kinds of things that you can annotate are things that people have done. And hopefully we'll talk about some concrete examples of these a bit later on as well. So here's an example of what we call NER, named entity recognition. We have a passage of text like this, and we want to say this is full of named entities. All right. We want to make this computer readable because the computer at the moment can only see that this is a long string of Unicode characters, all in the Latin script with a few diacritical marks, and has no particular way of knowing what any of these words mean. But we can go through very easily, and this is something which some of the annotation tools we'll talk about make very easy for you to do. We can go through and say, look, here are a bunch of place names in this text, and here are a bunch of personal names in this text. And there are also, which I haven't highlighted on here, there are indirect references, there are references to unnamed people, there are references to places via ethnic terms, which are not really references to the place. So the Plataean there called now Clades, that's not a reference to the place Plataea, but it is indirectly, it refers to the place Plataea, and so could be tagged as a place name if you wanted. There are events taking place in here, there are references to time, the numbers here, 1, 2, 3, and 4, are internal citations within the text. The herald, it may be that you know who that herald was. In this particular case, I suspect we don't, but in theory we could, and we could disambiguate those as well. So this is essentially what we call named entity recognition. There's or hand named entity recognition. There are other forms which I'm not going to go into here of automated named entity recognition, where software that starts, and the simplest thing they do is they start and go through, look for all the words that begin with a capital letter, and then do further algorithms to disambiguate those. But this is essentially what we do when we disambiguate and we annotate a text to show the entities that are being mentioned in it. And so that's basically just illustrating that with colors on the screen. Those colors don't mean anything. I literally just highlighted that in a Google Doc and said, make this text purple, make this text red. But if we were annotating this in XML, as we started to see last week, we might take, and I've chosen a different piece of text here just for variety. We might go through this and say, okay, here's the piece of text. This is, as you can see, a well-formed XML fragment. It has a root element text, has no other content in XML, just has the big text block in the middle. And we could just go through here and we could add internal annotations to disambiguate some of that information. So we say Piraeus is a place, Glaucon is a person, Ariston is a person, the goddess is a person. Let's say you could further distinguish between people and divinities if you wanted. The festival is an event, the procession is an event. Thracian, as we said a minute ago, is sort of a place reference. Certainly you could point to Thrace on a gazetteer or on a map, so it's potentially useful to tag it as that, and we can discuss the and this is already an annotation, right? We're already saying that this string of characters, Piraeus, which is characters 23 to 32 on the page, is a place reference. Okay, and that's already an annotation. We could do more annotation than this. We could go further and say this place reference Piraeus is specifically a reference to the port of Athens, and we use a gazetteer, Pleiades, which has given the Piraeus the identifier 580062 to disambiguate that from any other place that might be called Piraeus in the ancient or modern, for that matter, world. Likewise, we can disambiguate Glaucon there as the Lexicon of Greek Personal Names identifier for Glaucon, volume 2, 13834, is this particular Glaucon, son of Ariston. At least I'm fairly sure it is. I only looked him up very quickly, but I think I found the right Glaucon to disambiguate in here. So this is a further step in the annotation. Firstly, we identify the named entity, and secondly, we resolve or disambiguate the named entity. And we can go further and we can disambiguate entities that are not named per se. When the text begins, I went down yesterday to the Piraeus, the I in this is Socrates. And so you could specify who the antecedent is of the pronoun in this case, for example. We can also disambiguate the text itself. The whole passage of the text, we can give that a reference to an external identifier, and an external identifier that helps us to identify. This is not necessarily a link to a page where you can find this text, but this is a URI which disambiguates this text in some external language. In fact, if you click on it, you will get to this text, but that's not a requirement of a disambiguator. And when you click on pleiades.sto.org/places/580062, you find a page about the Piraeus. It doesn't take you to the Piraeus. We haven't developed that transporter technology yet connected to URIs. But so just to give you the analogy, clicking on the link for the first section of the Republic isn't getting you back the fragment of text is not a requirement for that to be a good identifier. Okay, because you don't get back the actual Piraeus when you click on the Pleiades link. You don't get the actual person Glaucon when you click on the LGPN link there. So yeah, so this is as I said, this is what we call inline annotation. So these are annotations using XML. It's not the only language you could use, but it's a good one, where you can inline annotate the individual pieces of information you want to add to this text. So we annotate the string I, and what we say about it is that this is a pronoun, the antecedent for which is Socrates. And so the annotation both has a location in the text and has some content that we're adding. And the content in this case combines the element, says this is a person, and the attribute saying that this has an antecedent, which we can expand in some way. Okay, and so the annotation has, as I say, those two parts. It has a place and it has some content, semantically structured content. The other form of annotation that we can talk about is, as I said, standoff annotation. And for standoff annotation, there is a web standard called Open Annotation, which is very useful for this. And this has been quite widely used even before it became the de facto web standard. So it's a well established standard that we can talk about and we can use in our work in digital humanities, in classics generally. And so I'm going to illustrate here using the Open Annotation format to make a statement, which I'm first going to make the statement in human readable language. And so my statement is that on line 1 of the Inscriptions of Aphrodisias, chapter 12, inscription 614, we have the characters Titon, Caesara, Autocrato, and continues on the further lines, but I've only given the first line. This refers to the person Imp Caesar Vespasianus Augustus, who has the canonical identifier. This is a human, it's not a machine identifier. This is an identifier that you would cite in a print publication in a footnote, PIR second edition F398. Yeah, and that's again disambiguating the string of characters that is on the first line of that inscription, and that's the human readable version of the annotation I'm about to attempt to make. However, we're just to enhance that a little bit. If we make such a statement in an academic context, I need to do more than just say, on line 1 of this inscription is a reference to Vespasian. I need to cite a source for that. I need to say who said so and where, right? So I say that I claim this and that today is when I made that claim, or whenever I created this bit of open annotation. It was It was a couple of years ago. The snippet I'm about to show you, I think, will have an older date on it. But so that's the in order to make this an academic statement, footnoted as it were, I need to give you all those pieces of information. So open annotation format will enable us to do both of those things. And so what you effectively do in open annotation is first you use RDF to create a series of what are RDF triples. I think we've talked about this in the past, but just to very quickly recap, an RDF statement is a statement that's made of three pieces of information, always, a subject, a verb, or a predicate, and an object. And each of those pieces of information is represented by an identifier, a URI. Okay, so in this case, we have created our own URI for the annotation. We're just using example.org because this isn't a real annotation. This is just for this illustration. We use this abbreviated URI, but this is still a URI that can be expanded for RDF type. So this is the RDF language, has a verb called type, meaning has type. So this annotation has type or is, and then this is the open annotation language. They have an entity in this language called annotation. So what we're saying is this URI is an annotation. Okay, and you can create any number of these annotations. Once you create an annotation, you can then start saying other things about this annotation by using this URI here to communicate that. So we then say this URI is an annotation. This URI has a target, which is the first line of inscription 12.6.14, has a body, which is Snapdragon person 6293, was annotated by this author in the VIAF catalog, and that's the unique identifier which will disambiguate this author as me. I think it was me I used as an example, and this is the time. In fact, this was nearly 3 years ago that I created this example. Was annotated at 7 a.m. Central European Time, 14th of April 2015. I can assure you that's a lie. I've never created an annotation at 7 a.m. I'm seldom awake at that time. So as with any piece of communicatory act, it doesn't have to be true. So this is the RDF saying exactly what we said in human readable language a few minutes ago. That we've created an annotation on this line of an inscription that tells us it is this person in this person disambiguation resource, and that it was annotated by this person in a different person disambiguation resource for modern persons, and the exact time, date and time that the annotation was made. To communicate this thing again in a more visual way, just very quickly, here is the inscription, or this is a web page with an addition of the inscription. But let's say this is the inscription. This is the first line, well, in fact, the first 3 lines of the inscription, because being an emperor, is a very long name. And we point at those couple of lines of the inscription, and we annotate those lines of the inscription with a identifier which takes us to this page about a person. And because that's very small, you can't see it. Here's the essential information about this, that there's the PIR identifier, the SNAP identifier, and the name T. Flavius Vespasianus. And so what effectively we're doing is we're taking this page of an epigraphic corpus, and we're attaching to the first line of this inscription a post-it note saying, this is the Emperor Vespasian. Okay, and this is by way of explaining the language that the open annotation format uses. The annotation has a target. The target is what we're pointing at, the piece of text, and it has a body. The body is what we write on the post-it note. Okay, and so this format, the open annotation format, is created by originally created by the Open Annotation Collaboration. It's now a W3 standard for web annotation, and this is how they identify an annotation. This is you can see, this is a very, very simple diagram, because it's a very, very simple concept. Is that you have an annotation, and the annotation has a target, the place you're pointing at, and the annotation has a body, which is what you say about that annotation, and there's just a relationship between the body and the target. So in fact, all the open annotation format is saying in the example that I showed earlier is that there's a relation between the Emperor Vespasian and these first 3 lines of the text. It isn't saying the person referred to in these 3 lines of text is the Emperor Vespasian. We kind of understand that that's what it means, but it's actually just saying there's a relationship between a page about Vespasian and a page about these 3 lines of the inscription. So it's a very simple format, and we'll maybe talk a bit later about some of the issues around how simple a format this is, and whether that's too simple, or whether attempting to make it more complex and adding more disambiguation in that relationship information would make it unusable, because it would no longer be a standard that everybody could use. So that's some conversation we'll have, and we'll talk about that in particular because this annotation format has been used by the Pelagios project, which we've talked about before, and we'll talk about again. I wanted to flag this just briefly. I think probably everybody who's watching this has seen the Pelagios project before and has seen the Recogito annotation tool before. So I'm not going to show it right now, but if you haven't, do go ahead and play with it. What Recogito does is creates a nice user-friendly interface for uploading your own text or image and creating annotations, just using point and click and typing, which in effect are open annotations, OAC open annotations in RDF in the background, but you don't ever have to see them. You just see your web interface that looks that's very, very human friendly. And so that's a tool which possibly Valeria, who's with us in this call, will talk a little bit more about later, because it's one of the main implementations of the open annotation RDF format in the digital classics realm, and we can talk a bit about that later. The other tool I wanted to show just briefly is also another user-friendly tool for web annotation, and this is the tool called Hypothesis, and this is the tool that we suggest you guys try out as an exercise for at home after we finish this session. And what this tool does, in contrast to Recogito, where you upload a text or you work on a text that someone else has uploaded and has shared with you, and you create your annotations within the specific environment of this tool, and it's visible to anybody who you share it with, but it's otherwise fairly self-contained, and you can download the RDF and put it in various places and connect it to the linked data web, but it's otherwise fairly self-contained. Hypothesis is a tool which basically loads a browser plugin on your machine, and you can then visit any web page on the web, and you can do 2 things. You can log into your browser plugin, and you can add annotations to part of this page, which annotations are fairly generic. They're a comment and potentially a series of tags, and I'll show you both of those in a moment. You can also, if you choose to, view any annotations that anybody else has made using Hypothesis and has made public on this same page or on any part of this page. And again, as I say, I'll show you this in practice in a moment. But what this enables you to do is to annotate publicly or privately, and create, again, this open annotation RDF format in that annotation. I haven't yet discovered whether you can then download the RDF from Hypothesis. I suspect reading the FAQ would tell me quite quickly, but just clicking around and trying to find the download RDF link, I didn't find anything. But that's something that we can look at. So for the exercise, as I say, we wanted to suggest. I mean, we can talk about that a bit more if other people have suggestions for taking this further. But that you find a page with some classical value. So maybe the page of one of your favorite texts in the Perseus Digital Library, or a papyrus in papyr.info, or an inscription in the epigraphic database Heidelberg, or something like that, and turn on the Hypothesis browser app and start annotating it and see what information you think it would be useful to annotate. And say, once you start highlighting it and tagging, this is very similar to last week's exercise, where you basically have freedom to tag anything that you think is interesting in this piece of text. And most likely, if we're tagging an ancient text or an inscription or a papyrus, no one else will have annotated it using Hypothesis yet. There are a few that you know, just by chance you might, you know, find one that has already been annotated, but by most likely we won't find one. So let me stop projecting slides for a moment and go instead to the web. I'll need to stop screen sharing and then start screen sharing again and select a different window, which is this one. Are you seeing the Hypothesis web page? No, you're not, are you?
We're not, no. It's just a white screen.
Excellent. Well done, Google Hangouts. Let's see if that's any better in Chrome. Apologies for this. I may not have installed the plugin in Chrome, so it maybe that it won't work at all anyway then, but let me try that again. Where's Chrome? Here. Okay. Reduce the size of the page. Okay, you're now seeing the page. That's good. And it'll take me a minute to open all the other pages that I had open in Firefox, but Chrome is hiding. And so what I was going to suggest was I was going to just, by way of demo, open the same passage we were just looking at in XML earlier, the first paragraph of the Republic, and I guess I need to log into Hypothesis before we start. Before I can do this, apologies, I should have checked that this worked before I did that. My password is probably yes. Okay. So if I go to, so how do I turn on Hypothesis? Hang on a second. Anybody? Where do I turn on Hypothesis in this browser? Okay, let me try and cheat. What if I nope. Okay, I'm probably going to have to install the Chrome extension.
Yeah, it says you need to install it to be able to turn it on in the browser.
Yeah, yeah. I have it all installed in Firefox. It's just that Google Hangouts doesn't like Firefox, which is pretty infuriating. Okay, but how about giving me a link to the add-on rather than add extension. Okay. Enable the sidebar via the location. Okay, so now if I go now into the Republic, refresh, do I have where is the turn on? Do I need to log in again? Okay, I'm logged in.
I think you need to select the paragraph, you need to annotate, and then.
Yeah, no, but I need to turn on Hypothesis on this page. It's supposed to have installed the the plugin for me, but I need to activate the plugin on the page. That's what I don't see on here. Enable the sidebar via the button in the location bar. Okay, got it. Okay, so we can now see, I think, can you see this on the Hangout? Some of those words have become yellow. These are things that I annotated earlier. I'll show you those in a minute, but I can, for example, I can highlight the phrase "the festival," and I click on Annotate, and it takes me over here to the annotation, and I can put this by this, the author refers to the Festival of Bendis in Paris. It's a fairly silly comment, but I could also add tags to this if there was a URI for the Festival of Bendis in particular. They may well be, but I would need to remember what the name of the Festival of Bendis is. I could use this tags field to create an annotation specifically to that. I can now make my annotation public, and that's a further thing that's been highlighted in there. I'll show instead some of the annotations that I made earlier. For the Piraeus, I created an annotation which has no text but has a tag, and the tag says that it's a place reference, and this is the Pleiades URI for it. Okay, Glaucon is a person reference, and this is the LGPN. This is far too small for you to be able to see it, of course, but if I make it bigger, you won't be able to see the text anymore. Ariston is also an LGPN identifier, quite easy to find because he was the father of the same Glaucon. The Goddess is a reference to the Wikipedia page for Bendis. And Thracian, and this is again something we can discuss, I have made a place reference to the Pleiades identifier for the Roman province of Thrace, which is maybe not what Socrates was referring to in the 4th century BC, but or what Plato was referring to in the 4th century BC rather. But in any case, that's the annotation that I created on there, and so you can see how in this case you're simply highlighting a piece of text and clicking annotate and saying either some prose about a note you want to attach to this or adding tags to it. And the idea of adding tags is those tags are more structured and could be actioned as we could search for anybody who has annotated a word with a Pleiades identifier using Hypothesis by searching in the Hypothesis API from Pleiades. That's one possible implementation of that, assuming the API allows you to do that. I haven't explored Hypothesis enough to do that, but that's the sort of thing that you do with annotations and with these sorts of tools. So that's just all I wanted to do in terms of showing that that tool at this point, and as a sort of suggestion for an exercise. And as I say, the intellectual process of this is going to be very similar to the exercise we did last time. So maybe I do focus when you're looking at this on the interface and on the way that you create these tags and what you might attempt to do when you make these tags, and think about what you would use them for in some way. And so finally, I've gone on for longer than I intended to. Let me finally go back to the slides, and for the final slide, I have just asked a couple of slightly bigger questions about annotation. I mean, these are questions that we can discuss now for a few minutes with the other people in the Hangout, but also that you might think about when you're doing your annotations as an exercise at home. And these questions, what features do we choose to annotate? And the obvious answer is whatever you're interested in, but in particular, it would be interesting to have people talk about what features they, in practice, have actually chosen to annotate. Why do we annotate in the first place? What do we do with these annotations? Are we able to export them, and what do we do with them once we've exported them? Who actually annotates a text? Does the author annotate their own text? Does a third person annotate the text that someone else maintains, as I was annotating Plato's Republic on the Perseids digital library? Do we have crowd annotation, such as taking Recogito into a classroom and having people annotating, having students annotating various things in there to contribute to a larger project? Does having shared tools like Recogito and Hypothesis help with creating these annotations? And do open standards such as the Web Annotations standard help with creating open annotations? Does it, or with using them perhaps? So those are sort of broader general questions. We don't have to go through those in order. Maybe we could start just by saying, does anyone else have any comments or anything they want to add to our discussion so far? Remember to unmute yourself if you start talking.
I can add a comment. Gabriel, thank you very much for your presentation. So to the question, okay, I'm presenting, but I would like to see your slides. So there is
sorry, I'll put my questions back up. Yeah.
But I have it, so maybe I can share my screen. Yeah?
Sure.
So you can see your slides. So.
Or I can. No,
I'm sharing.
I can put me back on the present, so now everyone can see my slide.
Do you see my screen?
No, because I've just presented me to everyone again.
Okay, no problem.
So we're seeing the slide again, either way.
Okay, yeah, okay, excellent. So the question, the fourth question, who annotates? Author, third-party crowd. Maybe we can add the machine, in the sense that, of course, behind the machine there is always a human being, we hope.
Right.
But another thing is, do we want automatic annotations, in the sense that, of course, we can start annotating many things manually. This is what we can do, and we have many tools. Hypothesis is one example, then we have Recogito and many other tools, and this is what we want to do. But we also want to try to, in some way, to experiment with automatic annotations, in the sense that we can generate, I don't know, list of words or other name entities, and try to map them on text. So this is, I think, that we can add also the machine, because the problem we have, for example, is that we want to annotate name entities in the original language, and we're talking about classical languages, speaking Latin, places, people names. We already have many authority lists with places and personal names, but we still miss many of them. So do we want to annotate them manually, or do we want to produce lists of these names and then annotate them automatically in our text? So this is one possible question. I don't know if we want to go on with other questions, or
yeah, I think that is an important question, and I glossed over the concept, the idea of machine annotation and machine NER, but clearly, if we think annotating named entities, for example, but any of the things we can annotate is worthwhile, and we think it's worthwhile at large scale, we can annotate ourselves, to a small scale or a medium scale, depending on how large an army of students we can set on it, and so forth, and how much time we have. But certainly on the large scale, it's going to be beyond this. But computers are quite good at learning from human examples, so we can start getting computers to help us annotate, and if they only get it right most of the time or some of the time, it may create an annotated corpus that's useful, and so we still then have the question of who's running this software on the corpus. Is it the author running it on their own corpus? Is a third person running it on a corpus they don't have control over, or is it part of a larger crowd crowdsourcing project, like the bots that go through and improve Wikipedia pages. But yes, the machine annotation, I think, is an important question, and it comes under why do we annotate in part as well, because if we annotate as a way of looking more closely at the text or of teaching people about the text, then we want humans to be doing that annotating, because that's the point of it. If we're annotating in the slow thinking sense, in the philological sense, then we don't. If we're annotating because we want a large corpus of text that we can then query, then machines will help us a lot.
There are also sort of mixed approaches. For example, Recogito has an automatic annotation, has a name entity recognition algorithm that would suggest annotations, and then humans, users, can go and check if they are correct or not and implement them and add comments and add tags. And so I would still consider it annotated by people, by a group of people collaborating, but it is prompted or it is facilitated by the machine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you would almost always want machine annotation to be mediated and improved by, enhanced by, vetted by, or at the very least trained by human annotation, manual annotation.
Yeah, in most natural language processing projects that I've seen, all of the ones that I've seen are academic, so maybe that's sort of just my perspective on it. But they do the combined approach that Valeria was just talking about, that they manually annotate a test sort of set of data representative to the corpus, and then use that as a gold standard to do machine learning, so that then the machine could sort of give suggestions with percentages of correctness, etc. But then a human goes through that and evaluates, then improves the algorithm, etc. So it's usually a combined approach between completely sort of free machine learning and human curated machine learning.
Yeah, and again, it's a scale question, right? Because if you want to apply named entity annotations across the millions of books in the Google Books archive, we can't check everything. We can go through this period of phases of training, of machine annotating larger and larger subsections, which we then check, spot check, improve, retrain, and so forth. But eventually, 99.9% of the billions of words will have been annotated by a machine with no human mediation ever. And we have to be aware that our spot checks have suggested that only 80% of those annotations are accurate. Is that still useful? For some purposes, yes. For some purposes, not. But it's against the question of scale. How much detail do we need, and how big a corpus do we want? I mean, this is keep coming back to some of the other questions. So maybe we could talk about some of these other things. So concretely now, rather than sort of in general terms, but what do you annotate? Those of you who specifically annotate things, and I know most people in this call will have examples that they can talk about, whether you're annotating images of inscriptions, whether you're annotating maps and texts with geographic terms in, whether you're annotating classical sources that cite other sources. There are, what do you annotate? Not as a general question, but as a concrete question. So anybody to answer. Or if everybody's too shy, maybe Monica, do you want to start?
Okay. Well, I have an example. Okay, so wait a minute. So I'm presenting, but I have to share the screen.
Yep. Okay.
Okay. I'm sharing the screen. I can show an example from the Digital Atheneus project. And here we can talk again about using the machine. And I agree with what you said before, in the sense that we can use automatic annotations, but we need to check them. So we have to think about the corpus, the extension of the corpus, because of course we can't check everything. Anyway, this is a specific project for annotating text reuses within a specific text, which is the Deipnosophists of Athenaeus of Naucratis. This Greek text is interesting because we have many quotations of other Greek texts, of other texts of the classical literature. And we have many name entities because Athenaeus quotes many other authors and also their works. And here I have a few examples of, for this project, my idea was, before starting annotating the text manually from the first word to the last word of the text of the Deipnosophists, my idea was, let's try to use what we have in scholarship and what other scholars produced in the past. Also because in Leipzig, for the Open Greek and Latin project, we are digitizing many print editions of classical text. And so the idea was to try to use indices of 19th century editions of the Deipnosophists. And in this page, you can see there are various squares, but there are 4 interesting things. So the Index Scriptorum by Meinecke, by Keibel, then the Index of Authors, Texts and Persons by Olson for the Loeb edition. And then there is also another index, the so-called Dialogi Personae by Keibel, which is a list basically of the sophists talking in the dialogues of the Deipnosophists. So basically here the idea was to produce digital versions of these indices because they are already disambiguated lists of authors quoted by Athenaeus. And an example of course, these resources online, you can access it if you're interested in, and I can show an example with Aeschylus. I think that the screen is too small, but anyway, this is...
yeah, can you zoom in at all?
Yes, 1 second. So I hope, because it's big. So basically this is, I hope you can see something now.
Not really.
I know, because anyway, this is basically the digital version of the index for the name of Aeschylus. But what I want to show you is another thing, which is the, wait, give me a second. So the so-called book stream. So the book stream is basically an alignment of these indices with the text. Here you can see, I think you can read this screen. Here you have book 1, this black square is book 1 of the Deipnosophists, and then you start with chapter 1 in book 1. And for each chapter you can see on the left and on the right the entries of the indices corresponding to this specific chapter in Athenaeus. And you can go to the text, and here we have an alignment. This is a first experiment, an automatic result, as you can see for book 1, paragraph 1. We have other paragraphs where we have more things. So the idea is to align the entries of each index with the Greek text of the Deipnosophists. This is a first result, automatic result. I already get many interesting things, but I need to check these results, of course. Here there are various problems, and the first thing is that usually in our indices we have entries in Latin, in the nominative, while of course the text in this case is Greek, and then we can have inflected forms for each name entity. In this case, these are lists of ancient authors quoted by Athenaeus. And as you can see here, I get results, but I need to check them also because There are various problems concerning the onomastics because I can get the first name of an ancient author, but there are examples where the machine can't recognize, I don't know, the ethnicon or the patronymic, other things. But this is a first result. In this case, this is something that I get the result by the machine, and given that I can manage, this is a working 15 books, I can check the result, I can correct it manually. But the interesting thing is that I can use lists already produced by other scholars, and these are lists of authors. In this case, I have names of ancient authors, not in the case of Olson, because Olson includes in the index not only ancient author, but ancient authors, but also in general names of people, like Pericles, for example, or something like that. But in any case, he also has names of ancient authors. And this is the alignment. I see the text, and after I can, I also get the specific identifier for each name. I have a URN, and which is a specific identifier, and I can isolate a specific person, an author name or personal name in the text. So this is an example. I don't want to go on a lot because there are many things here involved, but this is an example of annotations of reused authors. Another example is from another project.
That's very nice. I just want to say that that's a really nice example of a round trip, because your indexes that the print indexes that you're using as a resource are themselves standoff annotations, right? In a non-digital environment, they're standoff annotations. It's saying, on book 1, chapter 2, line 3, here is, a reference to this person, and it's disambiguating. It's only disambiguating with a string because the concept of the URI didn't exist. But it is an annotation, and you're using some dark sorcery to turn those analog standoff annotations into digital inline annotations to enhance your text, and obviously hand improvement, to create a much more richly annotated text, which you will then presumably also add further annotations of things that are not in the indices by hand and automatically going forward. So that's a really nice round trip. I like that.
Yeah, and then of course we can export these things in different formats, because we can generate an XML file with these annotations, or then we can have a JSON, or we can produce a database. So there are different possible things, and we have to think about that, because we have so many texts, and we definitely need lists in the original language, in Greek or Latin in this case. So of course we can annotate manually, but we have also to devise methods for getting automatic results.
Do you have a sense of what percentage of the automatic results is correct in guessing between the Latin name in the index and the Greek name in the text?
Yeah, I don't have a percentage yet. I'm still working on the project, but I have to say, because here there are two problems also. Because the first thing is that these indices have Latin entries, but with the transliteration and with the Levenstein distance, I can get good results. The other problem is a problem of citation systems, in the sense that for the Leibniz office we have two citation systems. The first devised by Casaubon in the 15th century, and the other one by Keibel. And so sometimes my digital indices are not precise, in the sense that I also have to disambiguate the correspondence between these two indices. Anyway, results are, the problem is that for the first name of an ancient name, results are excellent. The problem is that I don't get, many times I don't get other components of the name. I don't know if I have the ethnicon or the name of the father or something like that in the text. This is the problem, because these indices, especially Meinecke and Kaibel, they mention only the first name in Latin. You know, but I have to say that the results are really good.
So you started talking a minute ago about the ability to download and export your annotations, and what you might do with them, and maybe we could start thinking about that a little bit. What can you do with these annotations, and maybe be thinking in the background of this conversation is the fact that that the OAC annotation standard is a web standard. Is that helpful to us in the sense that, you know, when you download your annotations and when someone else downloads their annotations, is there anyone who's interested in both? And this maybe is something that Valeria could also speak to with Pelagios, because we briefly touched on the Recogito annotation tool, but of course the value of that is that the annotations it creates in the background are in OAC that you can then download, and that the Recogito tool will let you download in various formats, including not only OAC but also inline annotated XML and all sorts of other things. What do people do? And again, this is a concrete question, not a general question. What do you do with the annotations you can export?
Yeah, that is actually one of the main point for us, which is really looking at what the community is doing with the annotation that they produce. And as Monica was saying about this amazing new tool, the fact that you can actually download your annotations in different formats make any tool, not only Recogito, much more flexible, of course, because the way that I see annotations and the way that I see increasingly the users seeing annotations is as a middle stage. It's not necessarily the end of your research process. It's not necessarily your final output, but something that you can post-process and get some more results and get some more information. So, for example, I mostly work with geographical kind of annotation, so with place names and locations and things like that. And one of the things that you can do is download these annotations, even in a simple CSV, and through that CSV create visualizations in Google Maps, visualizations in GIS software. If you have, the right kind of information, you could also process that in a network analysis visualization tool and start looking at the relationship between things that have maybe the same tags or something else in common. And about the open annotation format, one of the critique that is often moved to the Pelagios project as a whole is that the open annotation is so, let's say, loose and, if you want, even vague, that it's not saying anything, that it's useless, and that much more structured information, and let's say on the other end of the spectrum, we find things like, I don't know, the CDOC CRM kind of approach, in which the information is highly structured and highly detailed, would be something that is much more useful to the users. But I think that it's an interesting tension that we might want to discuss further. We believe that a lightweight annotation, like the open annotation, is something that everyone can create with a simple interface and can put things, can connect things. And maybe it doesn't say necessarily much about that connection, but saying that there is a connection, I think it's already an added value to the data alone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it is, it's a bit disingenuous to say that saying this passage of text has a relationship to this place in a gazetteer is not saying very much. It's clearly saying this passage refers to that place, or this place is a disambiguation for that passage.
And not only, you could say, this place is in this text so many times, which is, right, again, another level of information.
And this is the original spelling being used in the original text.
Yes.
And this is the state of the text, and here's the surrounding context for the text. Yeah, there's all sorts of things that you are actually saying with this annotation, even though the annotation itself is just saying A has a relationship.
There is a connection, yeah. And when you start putting together different kinds of annotation, as you know, we as an example, we show a little bit with Peripleo. Then you can start seeing what kind of different materials are attached to the same things that relate to the annotation. So for example, if there is a place mentioned in a text, you can also see, oh, okay, these coins were found in that same place, or this other ancient text mentioned that place, or this place has other variant names that are in other gazetteers that I didn't consult, but you know, the information is there. So I think that, of course, you lose something, but I think that this lightweight, this enormous flexibility is the right approach to reach the largest number of users.
Undoubtedly, yeah. We were having this conversation several years ago now, before the creation of Pelagios. In fact, this conversation was taking place in the Pleiades community around the Lord ontology, which was being created, which partly led into conversations about Pelagios, I think. But we were having conversations about, you know, if you say this text or this object or this archaeological site or whatever has a link to this place, there's at the very least a few things you want to be able to disambiguate. I want to be able to say, and this is, at the time I was working on ethnographic corpus, so I wanted to be able to say, based on the things that came out of my inscription editions, I wanted to be able to say, this text names this place, right? It refers to this place, it attests to this place. I also want to be able to say, this text can now be found at this place. This text was originally found at this place. This text originally was created at this place, which might be a different place, right? I want to be able to say this text names this person, or was authored by this person, or was a letter sent to this person. These are very concrete things that actually makes a big difference to say, you know, this person wrote this text, or this person is mentioned in this text. And you know, you're losing a lot if you can't disambiguate that. However, not everybody will have those same distinctions. So the distinctions I'm giving here are, you know, very neat. It wouldn't be difficult to come up with an ontology that made those five or six distinctions, you know, we could leave it at that. And if everyone in the world was happy to use that, then we'd be fine. But that's not going to be the case. The only thing that everybody in the world is going to be able to agree on has a connection to. Everything else beyond that is going to be specialized.
Yeah, and adopting, you know, a simpler language, a simpler vocabulary, like, you know, the simplest one, the OA one, doesn't preclude that people can add more, you know, richer and more detailed annotation and information if they want to. It's not, you know, all or nothing kind of choice. But you still preserve, you know, the information that there is a relationship, and that is, you know, readable and understandable in various different systems.
Do we still have 2 minutes?
Yes, yes.
I wanted to add one thing to this last reflection, in the sense that we can use open annotation definitely, and we can add other annotations. I would like to share one thing. I try again. So I hope you can see something here. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
I hope you can. So anyway, this PDF is available online, and I can add the link to the class outline. I don't want to discuss about it specifically now because we don't have time, but this is a schema. So this is a way, so we tried a few years ago to combine open annotations with other models, the PROV model and SAM, which is a specific model, the systematic assertion model. So basically the idea here is to combine different data models to represent what? Here in this this is a poster, and in this poster we represent here the work of a scholar annotating a text and asserting something about a text. Again, I'm going back to text reuse because this is my research topic. But anyway, this is a model that we can use for other things, including inscriptions, papyri, literary text, etc. So the idea is to use these models for annotating something, but also for annotating assertions about something by different people, different scholars, different students. If you're interested in this, I will share the link to this PDF. This is a poster we published a few years ago. So, and here you have a schema where you can see different links and connections among different annotations using different data models, including the Open Annotation for data model, and then PROV and SAM. But I stop because otherwise is too complex. But anyway, because Valeria was saying that we can, of course, annotate something and we can add other annotations, and this is another example. We can also combine different models. These are open standards, and we can combine them for many different purposes, according to our research. Again, I think that the priority here is, if it's possible, when we start a project, to think about what we want to annotate, what is the goal of our project. It's difficult, it's always difficult, because we have a general idea, but then we discover many new things. But definitely this is the effort to try to understand what can I annotate, what do I want to annotate, etc. And then when you start annotating, you get in troubles, because the idea is to annotate everything, but anyway. Yeah. Yeah,
no, absolutely. The idea of creating your own ontology to do exactly what you want to do, but especially on reusing existing ontologies, I think is particularly important. The Lord ontology, which came out of that work that I discussed from 10 plus years ago, still exists, but it only exists to fill the gaps in the existing ontologies. Including, RDF and PROV and various others, and Open Annotation and SciDoc. So it's, it fills those gaps and says things like, this text is written on this object. This object was found at this place. Specific archaeological statements like that it can make. And so yes, as you say, you can always enhance the basic connections statement that you make in Open Annotation with other ontologies. I mean, that's the value of using a standoff format, is you're not tied to a single technology, to a single ontology. A few minutes ago, Anisa asked a question in the comments here, a general question. She says, I think she's asking, how badly are large-scale machine annotations likely to be affected by the changes in innovation that are inevitably going to come in technology? Does anyone want to speak to that? This is presumably something that Pelagios have been thinking about, or anyone else?
I see Monica smiling. I'll leave this to her.
I'm smiling because, well, wow, this is a big question. So, no, but please go on, Valeria. No, I don't have an answer to this question now, but definitely this is something that we have to think about. This is a problem, of course, in general. So yeah,
there are two obvious ways in which this is an issue that I can think of. One is if standards change and improve and evolve, where we find that if we were constantly developing and constantly curating the data set that we created, that would be fine. But that's not how life works. Sometimes we will publish a data set and not touch it for 10 years. And if standards evolve over that time, it can acquire inconsistencies with new incompatibilities with new standards. So that's one problem. The other problem is that if we have done large-scale machine annotation, and 10 years later, the algorithms, the machine learning algorithms for creating such annotations are just orders of magnitude better now, is our work any use to anybody at all anymore? Or will it have to be replaced? And those are the two main axes that I can think of in which technology could leave this sort of work behind.
Yeah, that's a big problem with any digital product. I mean, any digital scholarly product. If you think, even just at the image quality, the money that libraries and archives have spent to digitize manuscript in JPEG, maybe 800 by 600, and now they're not even good enough for the web. So yeah, I'm afraid we put ourselves in a very bad situation, but I mean, we'll deal with it.
Yeah, I think when it comes to large-scale machine learning work, the data upon which we do these annotations has to remain available, the raw data, and the code that we use to create those annotations should be published alongside the results of our work, because that's standard, right? I mean, that's just if you're doing digital work, you have to do that, just as if you're doing philological work, you have to have a footnote, a bibliography and apparatus criticus. It's absolutely essential to publish your code and your data as well as your published outputs, your results. And so if code improves, you may have published this work and not be able to work on it constantly for 10 years, but if someone else still finds it useful, they can take your code, enhance your code, or discard your code and replace it with some other code, but use your base data, do a whole bunch of new machine learning on the top of it, maybe using some of your gold standard work to start with, which is always going to be useful because that won't expire. And then, one of the questions they might ask is, how much better are the new algorithms than the algorithms of 10 years ago? And that in itself could be a valuable piece of research output. In a way that, it's possibly less interesting to rephotograph a bunch of manuscripts in a library and compare them to the crappy 800 by 600 photographs of many years ago. That's probably not a very interesting research question. We know that those are crappy.
They're going to be better. Yeah.
Maybe it is. I mean, maybe image curators would actually find value in such computational comparisons. I don't know, but certainly, you could. The development of technology and of standards is in itself an interesting topic to research, and has to be if we care about these things.
Yeah, and there are already projects that aim at recycling in a good way. Digital Humanities project that were done 10 years ago. And I know for a fact that they find a lot of difficulties in being funded because no one thinks that it's very interesting to to focus on the life cycle of a digital humanities project. But I think that it's a really short-sighted approach, and I would actually be very interested in seeing how much can you reuse, in what ways can you improve, what have you lost from digital humanities projects that were done 15 years ago.
Yeah, I think the difficulty that you described is a factor of the fact that most digital humanities projects are funded via the rhetoric that they are humanities research, conventional humanities research, and they just happen to be using digital tools. So we can convince the funding body to fund this digital history project because they understand the value of the history. When we start doing meta-digital humanities, where we're studying the digital, it then becomes a bit harder to convince them of that. But it's equally essential, right? I mean, historians study 19th century historical work about medieval history. So why shouldn't we study 10-year-old digital humanities work, which has evolved probably as much? We're getting off topic, but well, okay, it's 1:15. So if anyone has any last-minute comments, please please jump in. If not, we can finish. Okay, then thank you all very much for the contributions to this. Thanks particularly at short notice, as we had to reschedule the originally planned session. So this is great. Just very quickly to note that next week, same place, same time, will be the second of 2 sessions on markup. So following up from last week's session, and Simona and Chiara and I will talk specifically about Epidoc and some of the tools for encoding inscriptions and papyri, and what information epigraphers and papyrologists annotate in their editions. So see you all next week. Thanks a lot.